Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to get rolling because we want to make the best use of time today. I'm really excited to have Ben here and with us. Couple things. If you are in a place to turn your camera on, that's awesome. I fully understand if you can't, but it just makes it much. It's great to see everyone's face as we're interacting. Um, we have some great speakers coming up the next couple of weeks, and we're going to be launching a lot more for the remainder of August and September, and really excited about that. So you'll be seeing all of that by the end of today come up on our site. And final thing, if we do have some promotional capabilities for RecFest, which is a phenomenal trade show. It's in its second year here in the US, but it's established and run for quite a while in Europe. It's going to be taking place the 14th and 15th, I think, of September. Although I could be wrong on the dates because I just had them on top of my mind, and like everything else in life, they went flying right out my right ear. But it's in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's phenomenal because it's a very different type of trade show. For any of you who have gone to the trade shows, it's outdoors, it's like a carnival, it's very relaxed and fun. You're in shorts and t-shirts, and I think it's an exceptionally rewarding experience. And it's primarily, or it's only focused on recruiting, hence RecFest. So it's very targeted to what we're talking about. So if anybody wants more information, just let us know, and I'll be happy to provide what we are doing in partnership with them. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Ben. I'm really excited. I've known Ben for a while and listened to him speak in the past, and the insight and data that he brings really is incredibly thought-provoking and insightful in terms of understanding what's going on in our industry, what's new, what's next, and what should we be thinking about. So with that, I do have one more influential slide, so I want to make sure I show it. If I can't, there we go. This is it. That's a game changer right there. So Ben's with us. I'm going to turn my screen sharing off. I'm going to turn it over to Ben. He's going to be able to share his with you, and I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit deeper into his background, and we'll get off and running.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. And so glad to be here with all of you. Looking forward to a fun conversation. And I don't just mean presentation, I mean conversation. So I'll share some data with you. I'll share some stories and case studies if we have time. I'll share with you some of the research we've done, but I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to ask you some questions, so like that, chime in. Bill said y'all are active as a group, so chime in the chat, hop in the conversation if you want to say hello, and we'll have some fun with this. It's my goal not just to talk at you, but to talk with you. So I actually started out my career in HR and recruiting, and now I get to do research. But the thing that I will never forget is that first day that I had the rec land on my desk. I was like, okay, please give me an admin, please give me an accountant, something that I understand and can go find. And it was a rec for a Black Hawk helicopter instructor pilot. So I, from the very beginning, was behind, out of my depth, had to figure all those things out on the fly. So I have a lot of respect for all my friends who are still doing TA, whether as a practitioner hands-on or as a leader in that space today. So Bill warned me, like, y'all want to chime in. So I'm going to ask a question really quickly just to start us off here, just to get you, just to get everybody sort of chatty a little bit. I'd love to hear, if you want to use the chat, just chime in. Think about the recs, think about the roles your company hires for. I'd love to just throw out there, what's a job title, what's a job family, what's a job position rec that you've had to fill recently, or that when that one pops up on your radar as it's coming, you're like, oh gosh, I'm calling in sick that day. So I'd love to hear from you what those sorts of things are. All right, I'll chime in the chat here and take a look. AEs, product engineers. Whoa, John, you may win. Arabian horse coordinator. My 7-year-old loves horses. That would be a really interesting one. Okay. Radiology, animal surgeons. Okay, there's like the vet communities here. Lovely. Okay. I can get that, Janice. Anything lower paying, or we've got to reload them, that's always a complicating factor. Excellent. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so I love doing that. I love asking that question. I'm going to come back in a little bit and try to revisit some of that, because it's always fun for me to see what we're struggling with. Because if you listen to the news, like, every company's laying off everything, no one's hiring anything, and yet all of us know that that's not exactly true. So all of us have these jobs that are hard to fill, tough to recruit for. regardless of whether it's a skilled trade, it's a chief scientist, it's across this entire spectrum. There's not any one flavor that is impossible or is easy for everybody to find. So thank y'all for jumping in there, for chiming in. I'll give you some more chances in a little bit to do that as well. So I want to tell you about the hardest job I ever had to fill before. So back in around 2010, this special operations aircraft called the Osprey was just coming into service for the Air Force. And their special operations teams were using this aircraft to get people in and out of sticky situations. And it's pretty amazing because, as you can see here, it has these rotors where it can fly and take off like a helicopter. But once it's in the air, those can rotate and it can fly as fast as an airplane. So it gives a lot of maneuverability. So the very first pilots and instructor pilots to ever train people, there were 6 people in the world. I was trying to convince one of them to retire out of the military early and come work for us and do this contract to support the Air Force. And over the course of about 6 months, I knew all of them by name. I knew all their kids' names. Like I did all of the relationship building, and finally found a thing to convince somebody to come out and step out of the military, retire from service, and to take on this role as an instructor pilot. And to this day, he's still doing that work over at Royal Air Force Base Mildenhall over in the UK. And the thing that connected for him wasn't money. It wasn't like an amazing benefit we had no one else had. We were at a smaller organization. We were competing against these big companies. The thing that mattered for him was he said, I'm the only person in my family who's really made something of himself, and I'm worried that my kids are not gonna, I want to set a good example for them. And so I talked to him about how he'd be setting the pace here, sort of a trailblazer for anyone to instruct this aircraft after him, because he was the first one to ever do it out in the wild outside of the military service. And so that's the ultimate thing that got him to connect into that and say yes to it. So just like all of you have figured out, probably, you have to find that connection with that candidate. You have to find that thing that makes them click, that makes this the right opportunity for them. That's the thing I found out, again, early on in my career, and that served me really well as I was recruiting through a whole bunch of roles, whether it was technical, whether it was administrative, and everything in between. So a ton of fun, a lot of good work, and some amazing stories to tell from that. I'll have to tell y'all sometime the time I almost hired a guy that forgot to wear pants and ended up getting arrested. That's a fun story. So really quickly about me, who I am, what I do. So I'm a researcher by day now. So I run the company Lighthouse Research and Advisory. We survey the workforce, candidates, we survey employers, and you're going to hear from some of those 2 different data sets today. I'll share some inputs from what the employers are thinking and leaders like you, how you're prioritizing things like recruiting automation and AI. I'll talk about some of the data we have on candidates, what they're looking for, what they expect from employers, some ideas and research-based tidbits to help you figure out, if you can make one small change, which ones may have the highest impact on your ability to close that rec and fill that position. So I enjoy that so much. I've written a couple of books. The most recent one, Talent Scarcity, is about why it's harder than ever to find good people. I was talking to Bill, again, over the last few weeks prepping for this. And one of the things that came up in the conversation is that many of you have mentioned to him how much harder it is to source good people, how you're having to, used to it was, hey, I can find 8 and pick one. Now I'm having to go out there and find 20 to get one good candidate out of that. It's really a challenge. And so that's what that book is all about. And I'll share some of the case studies from that book with you if we have time later today at the very end, just to give you some idea of some creative things companies are doing to solve for that. And beyond that, I do lots of other things. If we happen to meet at a conference, RecFest is only 2 hours north of me. I'm down in Huntsville, Alabama. It's a busy travel season for the fall. But if I get to RecFest and we happen to meet up and say hello, I don't do coffee. So I won't meet you over coffee. But if you can find a place with ice cream, I will sit down and chat with you to your heart's content. We'll have a good conversation about what's happening out there and how we can make good progress on serving the candidates, serving the business, and all those kind of things that you care about day to day. So I mentioned we do research. It covers a lot of things, not just talent acquisition, but it's all within the bubble of HR and talent. So anything that matters for your workforce, for your HR team, we do research on that. I share that back broadly, lots of industry conferences and speaking this fall, but also internally. I'm talking to a company right now about coming to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I thought that was a made up name until I found out for sure. That was kind of a surprise. Coming up there to speak to their team about some of the data we're seeing, the trends we're seeing. So I love being able to share these kind of things. And it's a joy for me to be able to take that data and bring it back to you and give you some insights, some tidbits, something that helps you to be a little bit better tomorrow than you were yesterday. That's my ultimate goal with all this. So very practical in nature. All right, I think it's all the setup I'm going to do. So I'll tell you really quickly about this research study we did, and then we're going to dive in and I'll share some stats, some data, some good stuff with you. So the research I'm going to talk about today is from our brand new TA study. We just finished it just before the summer began. 1,200 employers around the globe, as well as 1,000 different candidates. So we have a good data set to pull from to be able to compare and contrast to see what leading employers are doing versus those that are laggards. For example, we can look at a lot of different things in there and find out what sort of good takeaways can influence you as you're thinking about how to support your candidate population out there. So I'll talk through some of the research and the data on the employer side first. I'm going to give you some inputs there, help you think through what's happening, what's changing, and give you some things that are top of mind for me as I'm talking to leaders like you on a regular basis. Chime in the chat if you're like, hey, here's something that we're seeing. I'm curious about this, or challenge me on a data point. I'm happy with that. That's always fun. Then I'll switch over to talk about candidate data. So I'll share with you some of the things that we're seeing across the candidate population, what they want, what they care about, their biggest priorities. I'll give you a list of ranked priorities so the candidates tell us these are things matter most to me out of everything in the hiring process. And last, if we have time for it, I'll get to some stories, some case studies. My goal is to be very practical for you. I want you can't get this hour back that you're spending with me now. So I want you to get some good things out of it that you can take back and then think through how they can apply at your own workplace. Okay, I think we're ready. Let's dive into this. So I don't know if you are a Bluey family. If you have small kids, you probably are. Bluey has taken the US by storm. It's a big show in Australia. I told my kids when I went to Sydney last fall, everybody talks about Bluey here is the easiest way to describe it. One of my favorite episodes, if you've never seen it, is Takeaway. If you have 10 minutes today, go watch Takeaway. If you have kids, it will make you laugh because it is your life every single day. But the takeaway that I want you to get today is that the research shows that a highly engaged, passionate, well-developed TA leader, TA practitioner, the demand for that has never been higher. So there's all these wild stories about robot recruiters and AI taking over everything. I wrote the book on artificial intelligence for HR, so I feel like I have a good grasp of what's available and what's possible out there. And I'll give you a story in a little bit of a company that did that, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. The research shows candidates don't want that. The research shows that we're not comfortable with that. So I want you to hear the big takeaway is that we have a lot of opportunity in the future. There's some good things ahead for us. We can figure out how to make some headway there. Then that's our best opportunity. There's a bright future there. So what the data show, we ask employers, the first question in every study for our TA study every year is, what are your priorities? What are the things that you are thinking about? You can pick up to 3 of them. We give them a list of over a dozen. And this is what we saw this year as our top set of priorities. So what you'll see here is not just the ranked order. So onboarding was number 1 and all the way down to number 6 was hiring manager relationships, but you also see the relative change from 2023. And that's always fun for me to see which ones are the big movers, the big changes. And for example, onboarding, a lot of companies thinking about how that's a bigger priority this year compared to last year. And so I'll share some data in there with you on why that matters, both for us as employers, but it's for candidates as well, because there's some, I don't want to say alarming, because I don't want to be the doom cloud person, but there's some alarming stats in the employee and candidate side of the data that you need to know about. So that's a big priority. Employers are talking about recruitment marketing. How do we tell our story in the market? How do we get our EVP out there and not to just look and sound like everybody else? How do we stand out from these other employers that are out there for the right reasons and not for the wrong reasons? AI, recruiting automation, popped up there. It's been in the top 5 for 2 years. Before that, it was way down the list. So it's finally started to pop up there as a bigger priority for companies, employers really thinking about how can we use these tools to take off some of the manual processes and really reinvest that time with candidates. And I don't know about you, but I've heard that party line around AI for a long time. Oh, it's going to let us do more strategic stuff because it's going to take off all this administrative things off our plate. And I was a little bit skeptical about that. So when we do the research, I actually ask employers, are you saving time by using some of these tools? And for the ones that say yes, I ask them what they're doing with that time. Listen, if we're playing Candy Crush or Farmville or whatever the cool games are on Facebook these days, then we're not getting much value of that. Where's the friends, right? If we're doing those things, it's not adding value. But if we free up time and we're reinvesting that into our candidate relationships or going deeper with those ones that are really high value candidates we're trying to find a role and a fit for down the line because they're just that good, that's a good use of our time. That is adding value. So there's some good things there. So I'll go through and tap on some of these things on the employer side, give you some inputs from the data, and then we'll transition over to the candidate side in a bit. So first up, the onboarding piece. I'm going to share some more data in a little bit on the candidate side, but when we ask employers to go deeper on onboarding, tell us about your process. Are you compliant? Are you actually engaging? Or is it really personalized and tailored to the individual? Are you creating something that helps me feel connected as the new hire? You've done all this work, put all this effort in, bringing them along this candidate experience. We want that to be a good handshake, bring them into the employee experience. We don't want it to be this weird mismatch of things. There's actually a psychology term called expectation violation. You probably experienced this in your personal life. You go to a restaurant expecting this, and you get this experience that's down here. It's not great. That gap is called expectation violation, and it feels icky. And candidates feel that every day. You know they do. When they have been treated so well through the hiring process, they come in, and then it's like, oh gosh, this is the same company I interviewed with. They're treating me so differently. So we're seeing a lot of employers leaning in, looking for ways to personalize, tailor that experience, trying to create connections from day one, not just checking off all your compliance things, because that's got to happen anyway. That's not anything special or exciting to talk about. How do we make sure that that person's strengths are being seen from day one? We're leveraging those. How do we make sure we're connecting them in socially to the organization so they're not thinking about leaving, they're thinking about, wow, I can't wait to get back because that person seems like we're going to be a good match, a good coworker, good peer, teammate. Start thinking about those kind of things. That's a big priority there on the onboarding piece. And again, I'll share some more on the candidate side in a little bit that we're seeing. One of the other priorities I talked about was recruiting automation. I don't know if you've seen this tool out there, Final Round AI. You can chime in the chat if you've seen this or some of the others that are like this. But here's what it is. Let's say that Bill and I are doing an interview, and Bill is interviewing me for a job, or we're interviewing on Zoom. And Bill asked me a question about how I've managed a team or how I've handled a challenge at work. Well, I take a second and I act like I'm thinking about that answer. I'm like, I got a good answer for you. And I just start reading off. This Final Round AI gives you a teleprompter right here under your camera. You can just read off the screen and recite this answer back to the interviewer, and they have no idea that this answer is coming off the top of your head. They have no idea you're using a tool to sort of game the system and beat the interview. It tries to make you positioned to be the best candidate out of that based on the answer it's given you. Tools like that, tools like candidates using ChatGPT and other things to try to rewrite their resume, write their cover letters, trying to use it to beat assessments that you're using. All of that is creating a lot of difficulty for employers. I was in North Carolina a month or two ago talking to a group of HR leaders, and one of the leaders said, a year ago, we could tell about 10% of the resumes coming in had someone who used ChatGPT to rewrite them so they look like the job posting. She said, today it's more like half. She said, we're getting half of our resumes coming in that look very similar because they've been rewritten by someone using ChatGPT to try to make the resume and the job posting sort of merge together so they show up in a search in our ATS. She said, it's making our work so much more difficult. We have to weed through so much more work to try to find the right people. These things are creating problems for us, and that's one of the reasons I'm an advocate for using AI responsibly, ethically within the hiring process to try to help us be a little faster, a little more nimble, a little more effective in some of the things we're doing. So when I ask employers about that, here's what they tell us. The top way, probably no surprise to you, is interview scheduling. They're using that as a way to speed that up. No one needs to be manually scheduling interviews anymore, whether we're using a simple Calendly link or we have an integration or ATS or a feature there, doesn't matter. We're using that as the number one way to try to automate some of the stuff we're doing and get that off of our plates, because none of us, if you did, you can chime in the chat right now and let me know. But I would argue that none of us got into this field of talent acquisition because we're like, I can't wait to schedule interviews. That's going to be the greatest day of my life. And then the minute the interview changes, we get to go through all those difficulties of logistics, trying to figure out a new time. Like, none of us get into it for that reason. It's a byproduct of what we have to do day to day. A lot of focus on candidate sourcing, new databases, new tools, new ways of outreach. I'll share some generative AI stuff with you in a little bit, where we looked across the market, this analysis of about 25 different vendors in the TA space to see who's doing what. I'll show you that in a minute, because several of them are using generative AI to try to reach out and connect with candidates and to do that initial outreach in a way that sounds human, sounds personalized, but it's not hands-on for us to do that because it's very time consuming. When I was recruiting for helicopter pilots, I spent a lot of time outreach, building relationships, starting from scratch. In the very beginning, I had to learn all the lingo. They respond back with, I have this certification, to go look that one up. What the heck does that even mean? So been through a lot of those kinds of things. So we're seeing these different ways that companies are using it. And I told you earlier I'd share a story with you. So a couple of years ago, Amazon put together this algorithm. And I wrote about this in my book, Artificial Intelligence for HR, because it was so wild to me. So everybody heard the story about Amazon. They built this algorithm to compare candidates in their database. They never used it. This is a different one entirely. This is a different story. So Amazon had built this algorithm because they were trying to find people in one of their markets, just couldn't find the right technical talent and have a high enough volume. So they built this tool that said, okay, let's say Norm reaches out, he applies for a job. The algorithm looks at Norm's background, his resume, and says, oh, he spent 3 years at Google, or he's got a bachelor's in software engineering. He's preliminary qualified. That algorithm sends Norm an assessment and says, okay, we'll see how qualified you really are. He's brilliant. He passes the assessment with flying colors, makes 100% on there. That algorithm then sends a job offer at the current market rate without any interaction with a hiring manager, no talk with a recruiter, no engagement with the company at all. It's completely and totally hands off for the employer to do that. And Amazon made several offers using that tool. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but that makes me feel a little bit weird, okay? Icky, strange, gross. Well, why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, how do we know the person that completed all those things? How do we know Norm is Norm? How do we know that it wasn't really Bill that took that one, or it wasn't Janice that took that one, someone else that did that for him? How do we know that Norm's values align with our company's? We're asking about the technical stuff. How many of you have looked at a technical screen and said, this person's good to go? You hire them, you're like, oh my goodness, what in the world? Like, this person has these weird tendencies. No one ever on their resume or in the interview says, I just want to let you know, I don't work well with teams. I don't actually want anyone to talk to me before 9 a.m. on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays because I haven't had a third cup of coffee yet. Like, they don't tell us those weird quirks, but those people already exist in our organizations today. They're just a part of what we are. Here's the one that gets me. I've gotten this resume before. I don't know about you, but you get this resume in and you think, what? They want to work with us? Like, this is exciting. I can't wait. I'm so pumped about this. Like, this is going to be an incredible interview. And the person shows up and it's this guy. And you're like, how did I miss that red flag? What sort of things were on the resume that I missed when this person ends up showing up for the job and I was expecting this guy instead? Right? That happens to us. Absolutely. It happens because the resume doesn't tell us everything about the candidate. And even using some of the tools like technical screens, that still doesn't tell us about the personality traits, about who they are, what makes them tick, what brings out their best work. Think about if you've ever worked with a leader, a manager who is really great at knowing you, supporting you, understanding you specifically, not just your job you did, but you as a person. They know what kind of work makes you come alive. They know what kind of work they're going to give you that's going to make you shut down, and the feedback they can give you that's going to make you do your best work or completely, make you give up for the rest of the day. They know all those things about you. It's hard to know those things about a candidate before they start, but we definitely can't see those things on just the resume. So that's one of the gaps that's out there right now with some of the tools around automation and AI. Like they claim they can do all those things, and there's definitely some gaps in what we can see with our own experience, our own expertise as recruiters. We've been through that. We know those sorts of things. I mentioned a minute ago, I was going to share with you some of the generative AI tools that are out there. We did this analysis a few months back, and so I've had a lot of fun sharing about this because there was last year, goodness, it's like every conversation came down to generative AI this, generative AI. We have this new thing. It's my job as an analyst to sort of cut through all of that. While I am an optimist, I am skeptical too, because I hear so many companies saying, we're the best, we're the first, we're the only. There can only be so many best, first, and onlys. You can't all be the best. You can't all be the first. So digging through all those things, we found two big peaks in the data, in the use cases out there that they're using generative AI for across talent acquisition. And it comes to creating something. So job ads, job descriptions, using this as a way to generate those. And there's more than this list. This is not exhaustive, but that's the number one way companies started using generative AI within TA was, let's generate something new because it's great at that. You give it a job title and it will give you this description. Well, then we started seeing it being also used later here in the funnel you see on the right on the content and outreach side for a very similar reason. it takes a lot of time for any of us to really tailor that message to those 30 candidates we're trying to reach out to today. It's hard to tailor that to each of them without taking up a big chunk of our time. So these tools are looking at their backgrounds, trying to make that very easy for us to say, hey, I saw this type of experience on your resume. I think this job would be a fit for you. It aligns with this skill that you used in a previous job. Trying to find some way to tie those things together so that we're not doing that all manually. So those are the two areas where we see that standing out the most. But there's other areas as well where we're seeing generative AI being plugged into this. And AI overall, the list is much longer than this small data set of companies. But generative AI specifically, this is where we're seeing it. I've highlighted the ones here in the red box because that's been an interesting one to talk about. I don't know if you've ever had this problem where you're doing an interview for a remote position and you get someone that does great in the interview, you hire them and the person can't actually do the job. I'm hearing from more and more of my friends in the space that are saying, yeah, this happened to us. And we found out that the person that took the interview was just a professional interviewer. They were doing it on someone else's behalf and the person couldn't actually do the job. We had to fire them, you know, a couple of weeks down the line once we found out that they couldn't do what they had showed us in the interview. And so some of these companies are coming out that are really focused on that fraud detection piece, whether it's catching that specifically, whether it's catching someone who's using ChatGPT to give answers back to a writing sample, trying to use some of the tools to be smarter about people who are using the tools, which seems circular, but trying to find ways to screen them out or catch them if they're doing those things so that we're not getting, we're not hiring the wrong person who's not equipped, not capable of doing the job just because they went out and searched the answer really quickly and brought it back to us. Now, we wouldn't hire someone that could Google an answer really quick and tell us in an interview. And that's the same sort of sentiment most of these companies have around that. We don't want to hire someone that's faking their way through this. We want to know if they can really have this skill, have this knowledge, have this experience to draw on or not. Okay, I'm gonna run through a couple of things real quick. I got so much data to share with you. I'm going to share a couple of things with you really quickly, and then I'm going to hop over probably to the candidate stuff just because I want to make sure we have time to get to that. That's one of the, it's like our peek behind the curtain, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their priorities are. So I'll make sure we get to that piece before we finish up today. So a couple of things that we're seeing in the research as big overarching problems, regardless of company size, regardless of industry, come down to a couple of things. Number one, the predictability. We may want a little bit of spice and novelty in our personal relationships, in our, you know, in your marriage and your whatever else. You may want some spice in life, but we don't want that unpredictability when it comes to our hiring funnels. We want to know what to expect. We want to know if I source this many, I screen this many, I hire this many, we want that number to be predictable. And so we're seeing that the majority of employers are still having trouble forecasting and hitting that hiring target that they're trying to get to. We actually did a little bit of a look at that about a month ago. I posted on LinkedIn some of the findings we found for companies that are hitting their goals, hitting right on the number. There's some things they're doing differently than everybody else. Really focusing on the measurement piece. So still to this day, a lot of companies are ad hoc in their measurement. They're just doing it sort of when someone asks them to do it. They're not doing it as a regular practice. If they're doing it as a regular practice, they're not always sharing it with the right audiences. It's mostly staying within our bubble of TA. They're not sharing it with key hiring managers or business partners or the leadership team of the organization. That's staying within that bubble, and they're missing a chance to show and demonstrate the impact they're having. We're seeing a lot of focus from employers on quality of hire as the biggest metric. But goodness, we could spend an hour on that alone, the pros and cons of quality of hire. Unless you're hiring for your own team, you don't control the end hire. So while we want to use that as a metric to show how great TA is and the value we bring to the organization, we're not making the ultimate selection. If that manager is picking the poor candidate every time because they played golf with them one time 5 years ago, that shouldn't reflect on us because they ends up being a poor performer or someone who leaves early from the organization. That's a conversation I've been having a lot lately. And then last but not least, one of the things that we're seeing in the data is so many organizations are saying that their ATS they're using is purely administrative. This isn't a tool that enables performance. This is just administrative. It's just processing. It's not anything more than that. Or they're saying this thing is so painful for us and for candidates to use, we try to avoid it if we can, which from a compliance standpoint, you can't do that, but you're trying to find ways to avoid that because it's so awful, so painful to have to go through the process of applying there. So a lot of companies are trying to figure out these big and broad challenges. One of the other things that we're seeing in the research is For the first time ever, we asked about the age of our respondents. So I asked about other demographics and other studies, but I've never asked TA leaders like you about your age, about your gender, things like that. And we saw some really interesting things come out when we did that. And here's a couple of those. So when we ask leaders out there in the world of TA, people that are running a TA team, people who are decision makers, who are managers of a team, all that kind of stuff, we asked them about some of the things that they're focusing on. TA leaders that are under age 34 are a lot more likely to say their ATS is, can I say crap? It's crap. It's not great. Okay, that's what they're saying. There's a different expectation for someone who's they call them digital natives, someone who spent their entire lives with one of these in their hand. They expect things different than some of us that may have had to figure out dial-up, or that may not have had to worry about having a phone attached to our hand for all that time. I mentioned this one here in the middle a while back at a conference, and one of the people in the audience was like angry at me for mentioning this. I can't, the data don't lie. So we saw that TA leaders that are 55 and above are much more likely to say that phone calls are the best way to reach out and interact with candidates. Our early in the stages, trying, smiling and dialing, whatever you want to call that. Now, I did a lot of that. I was wildly uncomfortable doing that because I'm a shy person generally, but I overcame that shyness to be a good recruiter. But that was hard for me. I would have much rather craft the perfect message that was going to make you connect and respond. I really prided myself in that. I didn't love the phone, but there's definitely an age gap there where someone thinks the phone is the very best way to connect with someone. Make of it what you will. Okay, I'm gonna pause here. I'm gonna hop right over and skip ahead to the candidate side of this, because there's some really good things in here that I want you to see. So, all right, yeah, I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna go ahead. So here's what we see. Well, the first question we ask candidates, similar to the employers, what's the most important thing for you in the hiring process? And here's what they told us this year. This shows you 24 numbers compared to 23, so you can see how that compares over time. This number one answer is knowing the starting rate for the position. And we are seeing that every year. If I laid this out for the last 3 or 4 years, that number has continued to increase every year. At some point, I'll stop asking it, because it's going to be almost every candidate is going to say that's their biggest priority. That keeps getting higher every single year. Part of that was driven by the whole pandemic thing, where companies putting billboards up saying, hey, we'll pay this much if you'll just come work for us. Part of that drove that. And part of that is just a higher expectation candidates have that, hey, if I'm going to be moving away from this job, I'm already employed, then I need to know what you have to offer. I don't want you to get 3 conversations in and find out we're way off. Expectation violation. Remember, I mentioned that one earlier. So focused on that one. Thinking about being this easy application process, which reinforces some of what I mentioned on the ATS a minute ago. If it's a painful experience, we're creating this blocker, this gap immediately between us and the candidates that we're trying to serve. We're trying to help them find the next career for them. We're trying to genuinely support them and find a position that's a good fit for them. It's a good fit for us. If we're putting blockers and barriers in the way, then they're going to opt out and go find an employer that makes it easier to apply. All right, so I'm gonna move on, because there's a couple other things I want to share with you. If you have dealt with candidate ghosting, and I saw from some of the job titles that you posted earlier around the difficult positions to fill, I'm betting some of you really have, whether it's around the skilled trades or that's around some of the other types of roles you're hiring for. I hear from so many companies that are really struggling with candidates that ghost you in the interview after they've applied. They apply, you can never get them back. The simplest form. We schedule an interview, they don't show up. Or we hire them and they don't show up on day one, the most expensive and difficult one for us to deal with. So all of those are challenges. Here's why they do that. So candidates tell us the number one reason is, once I figured out more about the company or the job, it just didn't interest me. I have a hard time holding that against someone. If they apply and they don't respond because they learn a little more, like, really not really a good fit for me, that's okay. We'd rather know that now than after we've interviewed them or after we've hired them. The other two here that I've highlighted tie into speed. I took another job because you took too long to get back to me, or the hiring process just took too long, it was too complicated. If we will simplify that, if we will change that a little bit, if we can streamline our hiring process, take out some unnecessary steps, that's going to lead to less ghosting, lead to faster hires, happier candidates all around, happier hiring managers, for goodness sake. I had an interview recently with Sarah Falpel from Enterprise Holdings, we talked about how they've made some changes at enterprise around their hiring process to streamline that, because they had hiring managers that swore by this 5-step interview process and they kept losing good people. And so she got them to agree to this new approach, and sort of as a group, as a panel, they would interview and pick candidates, and they would give up some of their own control over the process in exchange for a faster hiring cycle. And they're hiring weeks faster now than they were before. So some pretty incredible findings there. So there's a couple things there on the ghosting front, things that we're dealing with, we're struggling with. And transparently, as the research nerd in the room, I was hoping that one of these would just stand out farther than everything else. And I could just say, hey, listen, friends, just go do this and you're good to go. But as you can see, answers 1, 2, and 3 here on the list are all within about 1 or 2% of each other. They're very close. And so there's not one thing to do other than be clear on the front end if we can, and really focus on that speed piece. That's going to help with number 2 and number 3 on this list. Now, let's say we do get someone that answers our responses, we have an interview, and they accept our offer. What are your chances of getting them to stick with you long term? So the data show that only 1 out of 3 people, 1 out of 3 say that after they accept a job offer, they'd stop looking. Only 1 out of 3. The other 2 out of 3 say, I'm going to keep my options open anywhere from a few weeks until I'm always open. That concerns me on a lot of levels. Number one, I can't imagine doing that in my marriage. Like, yes, I'm totally married, I'm totally committed, but I'm going to keep options open for a little while. That's totally weird and strange in that relationship. And yet that's how candidates, these new hires, are treating the hiring process. The other part is, if I can't trust them to commit here, what else can I not trust them to commit to later on as an employee? If I ask them to do something, they say yes. Are they truly going to do that? Or do they still have this sort of, maybe I will, maybe I won't sort of relationship there? And one other piece here that ties into the onboarding I mentioned earlier, I told you I'd share this stat with you. When we look at the data from workers, how long does it take you to know if you're going to stay with the company or not? 2 out of 3 employees tell us that they know within the first week on the job. So I used to have a great hiring manager that worked for an organization. He had this sort of touch point, 2 weeks in, 1 month in, 90 days in, really focused on making sure that person was up to speed. And if I was working that person today, I had to warn him, listen, you can't wait 2 weeks. You got to get this in before that first week is up, because 2 out of 3 of the people you're hiring are going to decide if they're going to stick around or not within that first 5 days. So we've got to be connected into those candidates immediately off the bat. As new hires, we've got to be transitioning them in and helping to connect them, helping to make sure that they see what sort of path we have ahead. If they don't feel like there's a path, then they're already going to be thinking, maybe this isn't really the right fit for me. They're going to think about moving on. A couple other stats on the candidate side that we're seeing here. Okay, a couple more things we're seeing here on the candidate side. I had a leader, like one of you, a little while back, that said, I want to know if someone's relationship with a recruiter affects their relationship with the company, their intention to stay. I know that I was the first touch point for a lot of people that ended up being hired at our company. I was the first recruiter there, so I had a lot of that influence. And over time, I still could come back to any one of them, and it felt like coming back to an old friend, because we had built this relationship to get them on board there. And so we asked candidates, does that matter to you? Does that relationship actually connect and persist over time? And 7 out of 10 candidates said yes. That person that I connect with, I've stayed connected for a period of time, including up to a year or longer. And so if you or your team are building relationships with people, connecting with them, one of the things that ties into this for me is reaching out to them with other opportunities at the organization when they arise. We talk a lot about internal ability and hiring internally. This is an example of that, where we can tap back into those because they feel like there's still a relationship for them on the candidate, on the new hire side. We can come back to them and offer other opportunities and try to make that available to them, visible to them, because they would be receptive. Speaking of other opportunities inside the business, candidates want to hear about that before they start. So 4 out of 5 say, I want to hear about what sort of growth opportunities, training opportunities, how are you going to make me more valuable, more skilled, more developed at your company? They're using that as a filter to decide which company they want to work for. If they've got similar pay rates or even a higher pay rate over here, but no development, they'll take the job that has more growth opportunities and really carries and follows through on that. I was talking to a company recently that's doing a bunch of hiring in the retail space. And they said, listen, our L&D budget is not zero, but it's basically zero. And so we have found out that we have a sort of tax on our hiring. We have to pay a higher premium to hire someone because they know that we're not going to develop them at all. And so to get them in the door, we have to pay 10 to 20% more for those individuals to come in and work in our stores because there's not any growth. There's not a career path. They're going to do that job until they get tired of it and quit. And because of that, we have to pay a higher premium to get them in the door in the first place. I'm going to give you a fun story here, and then I'm going to get into some of those case studies because we got enough time to get to those today. So there's a great book that I read years ago. It's about sales, but there's some good tie-ins with recruiting that you would probably appreciate. If you like to read, the book is called Giftology by John Ruhlin. And the story in there that he tells, one of them is about when he was going to propose to his fiance or his girlfriend at the time. He decided on this very elaborate approach. This is about the time the movie The Notebook came out, and she loved it. So he was, I've got this crazy idea. So he's gonna get a friend who's a makeup artist to doctor him up so he looks like he's a 60-year-old man. He's gonna go and sit next to her on an airplane. He's gonna sort of like get someone else to slide her this notebook that's got all these handwritten stories of their time together and his greatest memories of their relationship. Really a sweet idea. And then after it's all done, he's got to propose to her and shock her as he looks like this old man. Again, some strange sort of things put together. And so he's getting all this tied together, all ready to go. And he's going through security to get on the plane, all the other plans in motion. And he had low blood sugar and passed out right there at security. And I don't know if you've been through airplane security lately, but they don't like people who are trying to make themselves look like someone who they're not. So he got to have a visit with the head of security, handcuffs, the whole deal, and ultimately was able to convince them that he was not had any ill intent. He was trying to do something creative for a proposal. But at the end of the story, she said, "You should have just asked me." She said, "You did all these things for yourself. You should have just asked me because I would have been okay with that. Just ask me." And that the lesson I took from that is while we don't always want to give candidates everything they want, they have this laundry list of desires and wants and requests. At some point, we have to give them something that they want. We have to think about what the candidate wants to receive. If we're going to get them through the process, we're going to get them to say yes to the offer, we're going to get them committed to our companies. We have to give them a little bit of what they want in order to get them committed there. We can't just, well, this is what the hiring manager said, so we'll just do what they said. That's not going to work in most cases. There's a stat I'll share with you in a minute towards the end. I've got a list of 5 takeaways for you. But one of them is that when we ask candidates, how many touch points is too many? The majority of candidates say 3 or more touch points is way more than I need. 3 is the max. Don't give me more than that. And if I make $50,000 a year or less, 2 is the max. Have a conversation on the phone, see me in person. You don't need anything else to hire me if I'm making less than $50,000 a year. That's what the candidates are saying. Anyway. So there's the book, Giftology, John Ruhlin. Again, it's a fun read. Stories like that one in there and others. It's really about how we can be giving the person what they're looking for in order to build that relationship, get them to say yes later on. All right. I'm going to share with you some stories, some examples, some case studies. Hopefully you're looking for that because that's what I'm going to bring to you. I'll give you a couple different companies that are doing some creative things around hiring, some things that when I heard them sort of shocked me and how novel they were. And that's why they ended up in the talent scarcity book, because I was just, these stories have to be told and shared further. So I'll tell about some of those things. First up, really quickly, some of the data I've shared today is available in our TA research report that we put out recently. And we make all of our research free to leaders like you. I've been in your position. My budget for TA research was exactly 0. And so we accommodate that budget. So if you want to see the report, that's available. You can see more in there about the importance of relationships in recruiting today, especially in a more AI-driven workplace and sort of workflow there. You'll hear about some of the other things the employers are doing to leverage AI in the hiring process, where candidates are okay with it and where they're not. It's other things in that report. So you can scan that, you can download it, and I'll make sure that Bill and team have this so that you can scan that later on. If you don't have a way to do that right this second, and you can get that report whenever you'd like. Okay, I'll share you 3 quick stories here, and then we'll see if we have any questions. I see the chat is like off the charts. So if there's any questions or anything else, Bill, if you flag those as we're going here, I want to make sure and address those when we pause here at the end.
Yeah, there's been a couple questions in there, and but let's talk about this, and then I can help drive to some of the answers as we get through this.
Okay, really quick, three quick stories for you, just some creative things. You know, as well as I had to learn when I was recruiting my Osprey pilots all those years ago, I can't offer one thing that matters to all candidates. Unless you've got a pay rate 3 times everybody else, then you've got the golden ticket. Other than that, you got to find some way to target populations of candidates. So I'll tell you about 3 different ways companies are targeting different populations of candidates. So the first one here, a couple different companies. I interviewed a leader at Allied Universal a couple of years ago. They hire a lot of security guards. There's a company called EasyJet that is based over in the UK. They hire a lot of flight attendants who are empty nesters, people who have just had their kids finally move off into college or move off into their own lives. And like, I've been a responsible adult for a long time in my career. What do I do? What do I want to do now? What sort of ventures are out there? CVS has a snowbird program where they let people who want to move south for the winter and avoid whatever winter's got to give you up there in the northeastern US, where everybody's like, they can avoid that, head down to Florida, and they'll find opportunities to work as pharmacists and other roles within their stores. So these companies are looking at and targeting people who have a wealth of life experience, a wealth of work experience. They're giving them some flexibility, and they're giving them a message that says, listen, if you're like in EasyJet's case, if you're looking for a new adventure, we're your place to do that. In CVS's case, it's like, hey, listen, you've worked for a long time. If you want to do this snowbird thing, we'll support that and find a place to plug you in, and you can continue earning an income, contributing, and at the same time, you get to enjoy whatever Florida's weather has to offer, or Texas, or wherever else you're going to snowbird that's not in the Northeast. So really, really fun story there. There's a study from Harvard a little while back that looked at what they call the hidden workforce. And what they found is there are tens of millions of people in this potential, and what they call the hidden workforce within the country. And a big portion of those people are people who are fair chance candidates. So someone who has a criminal record or has a background in that precludes them from doing work in the workplace. So a couple different ways of approaching that, whether it's just having an open to fair chance hires policy. There's a great company in Ohio called Hot Chicken Takeover. It's a restaurant. I'm still dying to get up there and actually try one of their chicken sandwiches because it's supposed to be incredible. But their leader told me they hire primarily fair chance candidates, and the loyalty from these individuals for someone giving them a chance is off the charts. There's another company called Televerde. They do a lot of call center operations. So if you pick up the phone today and you call and say, hey, person on the other end says, hey, this is Dell support. What can I do for you? And Dell has outsourced that to Televerde. The chances are that woman who answers the phone is currently incarcerated somewhere within the US or within the UK. They go into a prison, they set up a call center operation, and they give these women an opportunity to work and start earning money to transition back to their lives once they've paid their debt to society. I think that's a great and incredible opportunity to tap into an audience that no one else is tapping into. You're helping them build their skills. You're reminding them of the value they have to offer, and you're helping them do this transition back once they're done there. So those companies that are doing those kind of things are tapping into a population of candidates no one else is considering. And last but not least here, on caregivers. So this one hits close to home. My wife, we have 4 kids. My wife took off when the 4th one came. She's like, I can't do this working stuff. I'm going to take off some time from teaching. And so that was almost 10 years ago now. And she's now trying to decide what she wants to do again, go back in the workforce maybe. But she taught for 10 years. And Audible has this really interesting program called a returnship. Not an internship, but a returnship. And they're looking at people who have taken at least a year off of work for caregiving for a parent, a child, a grandparent, someone they've stopped working just to take care of that person during a time of need. And they're giving them a chance to do a virtual 16-week paid returnship program. They're building skills, they're being reintegrated into the workplace, and they get a chance to sort of try out the training wheels on for work. And Audible, it's brilliant because they end up hiring a lot of them full-time once they're done with that program, because they've had a chance to see who really is a high performer, who's contributing mightily, who's doing good things. And so it's a really interesting way of approaching that, and creates a different lens on something that many of us were taught traditionally to look down on. My early days, manager says, hey, look, there's a gap in their resume. We don't want them. Doesn't matter what that reasoning was. Doesn't matter what happened there. We don't want them. And so Audible says, it's flipping that script saying, if you have a gap on your resume, We want to talk to you because everybody else is going to overlook you, and we're going to go out of our way to look for a way to bring you in. So there's some fun stories there, some good examples of case studies, creative ideas, creative solutions for trying to hire, even when it feels hard some days, even when you're like, oh, I've tried everything. That's some examples of things that show that you maybe not have tried everything that you could. Okay, take a breather. Bill, what kind of questions and stuff we have come in?
Well, we've had a number. But one of the ones that I had seen, and by the way, I love to watch the dialogue and see how you guys are answering each other's questions. But internal mobility and tools to help with that have come up. The ability to, I think one that I can appreciate because I've done a lot of sales hiring is tools to help pass through resumes initially to see who's in and out of the process, because I don't have enough time to evaluate 300 resumes that apply for a job. And so how do I optimize that process? So any thoughts on that would be awesome.
Yeah, so there's a couple different angles there. You could hire 47 people and let them do that, or you could have a technology that does that for you. And there's a range of those, whether you're looking at, hey, we're going to try to do some skill-based matching. We're going to put them through, depending on the philosophy of the company, some people prefer to do a short assessment that's more than just the skills and technical piece, looking at some of the other things there, like how would their values fit with the values of our team, or what sort of characteristics they have that maybe the rest of us don't have, where they can fill a gap for us and help us to solve bigger problems for our clients. They don't have the same blind spots that we do. For example, I was talking with a friend at the FBI recently, and he said, we've had to start hiring in a different way, because just hiring based on, well, did you go to this university, this Ivy League school? Did you get this kind of degree? And you have this background? Like, we all have the same blind spots. And he said, it's costing us operational risk. And you don't want to hear that from someone who works at the FBI, who's in charge of protecting the nation from threats. So they're looking at different ways to do that. And again, it depends on it depends on your preference. If you're one of those organizations that's really leaning on the skills, what tools can we use for that? We talked with a team at Filtered recently. That's who Sarah at Enterprise is using. The story I mentioned earlier, they're using the company Filtered to help narrow that list down, to do some initial vetting. So they have a small pool of candidates they present to the hiring manager that already have some preliminary qualifications done. And they're not giving them 47 resumes to have to scan through and flip through, because we all know that's going to take them 3 weeks to turn back around. So I usually see this different set of priorities, whether it's around skills or more around sort of personality. That's where those sort of range spectrum is on the preliminary vetting and assessment piece of that. And everybody has a different focus. So I've got good stories from each of those types of companies and leaders that have a different priority there that have success. So it's probably not like one's better than the other. It's just which fits your hiring manager style and your approach as a company.
That's great. Well, thank you for helping answer that. If anyone else has any questions that we haven't answered, because a lot of the questions have discussions around them in chat, just jump on and ask. I think that would probably be the easiest way to provide value.
Yeah, jump in, knock me out. I'd love to hear it. Ask a hard question, stump me.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind. So it was really great to hear you talk. I really appreciate all your insights. So I work in the tech industry, which, as we know, is very volatile. And I deal with something that you mentioned, where candidates are always kind of keeping their open to work on LinkedIn open, even after they're hired. And to be honest, I can't help but fault them. I myself have been through 3 layoffs, and layoffs are abundant in the tech industry, especially. So how as a recruiter do you think I could talk to people, not necessarily like discouraging that behavior, because I don't think that's any of my business necessarily, but just talking to them about being comfortable at the company that I work for, and how I can kind of continue that relationship as they get onboarded and get vetted into the company?
So I had a chance to talk with a leader recently, and he told me like this. He said, "This is my secret tip. This has helped us to beat 90% of the counter offers in the last year." And he said, it comes down to, when we're talking about this, he said, here's the other thing they have available, the other opportunity. In your case, Riley, they have this other thing that could present itself at some point, whether it's there or it's in the future, potentially. He said, the thing I asked them is, what would make you not take that other opportunity? And let them elaborate on the things they're concerned about, things that they're fearful of, things that are risks in their opinion. And they'll tell you the key things to touch on when you come back to them with, well, yeah, I understand that could be a risk to you, or I do get that they're newer in the space. And you get to come back and sort of play off of those things. They're telling you how to sell back to them. Essentially, it's like an old sales tactic almost. So that's one of the things I've seen be successful, is trying to understand, especially if it comes up. You can also, depending on the relationship you have, say, listen, if something comes up and you like, I don't have any like vested interest in, I'd love for you to stay here, but I'm rooting for you and success in your career. So if you want to bounce it off of me, we can talk about whether that's the right fit for you or not. And I'd be happy to sort of give you some coaching, some guidance, because I've done this, for 1,000 other candidates over my career, and just be seen as the voice of experience in the room for them. And that may be the thing that helps to make that leap. Ultimately, in the perfect world, their managers engaged, supportive, connected to them, because the research shows that's the most influential piece on their intent to stay at the company or not. So in a perfect world, that manager would be doing all those things, but we know that we don't live in that rainbows and skittles and unicorns land. And so we're trying to take some of that on ourselves. So good question, Riley.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hey, Ben. Thank you so much for the valuable information. We really appreciate it. My name is Chris Bell, and one of the questions that I had was about 15% of the employers having a personalized and engaging and compliant hiring process for onboarding and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about what these companies are doing?
Yes. So I actually had a chance to interview Ashley Brown. She's the head of onboarding at Zapier, and they're doing some pretty incredible things around really tailoring the hiring process, the onboarding process, connecting into those candidates. We talked a lot about their redesign of their onboarding process, because it used to be this very long thing that was drawn out, and they tried to be smarter about how they batch that stuff together. So overall, as I said a minute ago, earlier today, one of the things that we find in the data is that if we can find ways to connect them socially with other people there, that's a sticky thing in the the onboarding process. So not just offloading a lot of information on them, because that's the common practice that everybody does, but how can I connect Bill to these 3 other people, whether he's working with them on their team or not, or he has some sort of personal connection with them, or they're all dog lovers and so is Bill, or they all have 17 kids and so does Bill. Whatever the thing is that connects them there, the earlier I can start doing that kind of thing, the better those connections will be. And that's an example of that. When I was doing this myself many years ago, walking around introducing to one of the people around the room, instead of saying what their job title was, like, this is what they love. This is the person that loves bringing desserts when we have the office lunch things, and trying to find some way to connect them to the thing that person loves, because they'll find some point of connection there. And that's what's going to make them stick around longer generally than anything else I could share as far as a policy or whatever else comes up there. If you ping me afterwards, though, I'll send you that link to the Zapier story with Ashley, because she goes pretty deep into some of the things they did and the time they saved, some other design around their process. It's pretty incredible.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, folks, we're at 2:00, and I know all of us have the remainder of our day to go tackle. So I just wanted to follow up with a couple of closing thoughts. One, we'll be sending out some information that Ben's provided that we'll share with everyone via email. And two, that could be really powerful is Ben has said he'd come back and kind of drill into any place specific from the general topics we've discussed today. So if there's anything out of today that you would like us to spend more time on, just connect with me on the chat function and talk. Let me know what it is, and we can find some time as we move out through the year to kind of retackle some of this in more detail. So really appreciate everyone taking time out of your day to be here. Even more appreciate you being a member of the talk, please, of the talk community. I'm just going to call it the talk from now on. Please share with your friends. The more people who join, the more power we can put together to deliver awesome content like this, and really excited that all of you made time to be here. So thank you very much. Ben, thank you. That was awesome. Great content, and I'm really looking forward to talking more. So thanks everybody very much.